Sometimes a question is asked and the answer takes a few seconds. Sometimes, however, the question is so sharp that the person across freezes for minutes. And sometimes, this frozen moment lasts long enough to be measured with a stopwatch. Exactly 192 seconds. The White House's influential figure Stephen Miller experienced exactly this before Congress. The question was simple: where did the $3.1 billion go? But the answer didn't come for 192 seconds. Each passing second increased the tension in the hall by 1 degree. The microphone was on, cameras were rolling, and Miller was sitting as if trapped inside time. This scene was one of those rarely seen moments in political history. Because silence is the most expensive thing in Washington. Speaking, making statements, even verbose filibustering if necessary, these are the basic tools of politics. But saying nothing for 192 seconds? This is either part of a very big strategy or an indication of a very big dilemma. In Miller's case, the second option seemed more likely. The question was asked, the clock started ticking. The session had started as usual. Congressional members were sitting in their seats, taking notes, occasionally whispering among themselves. Stephen Miller was at the podium, looking through the files in front of him, occasionally sipping from his water bottle. The atmosphere wasn't tense, at least not until that moment. Until the question came. "Mr. Miller," said a congressional member, with neither anger nor haste in his voice. Just a cold, calculated determination. "Let's talk about the $3.1 billion allocation from the federal budget. Where did this money go?" The question hung in the air. Miller raised his head, looked at the member who asked the question. For a moment he seemed like he was going to speak. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The advisor next to him whispered something but Miller ignored it. And at that moment, the stopwatches started ticking. If you're also curious about the behind the scenes of such critical moments in Washington, don't forget to follow our regular analyses. The first 10 seconds passed. Miller was still looking at the files, as if he would find the answer he was looking for there. It became 20 seconds. The hall slowly began to stir. Congressional members looked at each other, raised their eyebrows. 30 seconds. Journalists put down their pens, focused entirely on the podium. This was unusual. When 60 seconds filled up, the hall had now completely fallen silent. No one was talking, no one was moving. Everyone was waiting to see what Miller would do. And Miller. Miller was still sitting, his hands placed on the table, his gaze frozen at a point. 90 seconds. The congressional member who asked the question was maintaining his patience. "Mr. Miller, we are listening to you," he said, but this time there was a slight momentum in his voice. As if saying, "Come on, how long will you keep us waiting?" Miller took a deep breath. They thought he would speak. But again he didn't speak. When 120 seconds passed, the situation was starting to take on an absurd character. Those watching live on social media started writing #MillerSilence in the comments. Some were measuring with a stopwatch, some were joking a record is being broken. But for those inside the hall, this wasn't funny at all. Because every passing second meant a loss of trust from an administration's perspective. 150 seconds. Miller finally opened his mouth. "Representative," he said. His voice was a bit hoarse, as if he hadn't spoken for a long time. "This allocation was used for the coordination of federal programs." The answer was so vague that it was as if he hadn't spoken at all. The member who asked the question shook his head from side to side. Coordination of federal programs? Mr. Miller, was $3.1 billion spent on coordination? Which programs? Which agencies? Between which dates? The stopwatch was still running. Miller fell silent again. 165 seconds. 170 seconds. Now the hall was almost holding its breath waiting. This wasn't just a question and answer. This was a matter of accountability. And Miller couldn't be held accountable. 180 seconds. 3 minutes. For 3 full minutes, there had been no proper answer to the question of where an allocation of billions of dollars had gone. Another congressional member intervened. "Mr. Chairman, if you permit, perhaps we should give Mr. Miller the opportunity to respond in writing. Because right now it doesn't seem very productive." But the member who first asked the question didn't give up. "No," he said with determination. "This is the United States Congress. Questions are asked here and answers are received. Mr. Miller should have come here prepared. $3.1 billion didn't disappear after all. Someone has to know. 192 seconds. 3 minutes and 12 seconds. And finally, Miller tried to say something. Representative, the details of this allocation are available in a comprehensive report. Our office can share this report with you. A report, came the response. Mr. Miller, if I wanted a report, I'd get a book from the library. I want an answer from you now, here, in front of the cameras. $3.1 billion. Where did it go? The reality behind the numbers. $3.1 billion is not an abstract number. This money could equal a state's education budget. This money is enough to make projects that will affect thousands of people's lives. This money means roads, bridges, hospitals, schools. And now, one of the White House's most powerful figures had failed to give a satisfactory answer for 192 seconds about where this money was spent. In later parts of the session, Miller recovered a bit. But the initial shock had passed. The damage was already done. Videos spread on social media. 192 seconds of silence. Miller froze. No answer. No money either. Continue to stay with us to not miss such critical issues where politics and economics intersect. Miller finally said this. Representative, a portion of this allocation went to border security, a portion to technology infrastructure, and a portion to consulting services. Consulting services? Asked another member. Who was hired as consultants? How much payment was made? Which companies received this money? Miller hesitated again. This time the silence lasted 30 seconds. Then he gave this answer. You can find this information in the documents we previously submitted. Which documents? Shouted the member who asked the question. Nothing was submitted to us. You're acting here as if you're solving a mystery. But this isn't a mystery, this is accountability. The 192 seconds of silence didn't just stay in that session. It was on the headlines of newspapers the next day. It was analyzed in evening news bulletins. Political commentators characterized it as Miller's worst performance. Some spoke more harshly. This was a disaster. Because in Washington, silence is perceived as weakness. Not being able to speak means not knowing. And not knowing means loss of control. And Miller had appeared to lose control for exactly 192 seconds. But perhaps the situation was deeper. Perhaps Miller knew the answer but couldn't say it. Perhaps the truth was of the kind the public wasn't ready to hear. Perhaps the $3.1 billion had gone to very different places than what was written in official reports. These were speculations, of course, but 192 seconds of silence was enough to lay the groundwork for such speculations. Time to be accountable. When the session ended, Miller stood up and headed quickly to the exit door. Journalists surrounded him, but he didn't answer any questions. He just said an official statement will come from our office and walked away. The congressional member who asked the question made this statement to the press. Today we saw here that billions of dollars were spent, but no one can account for it. This is unacceptable. The American people deserve to know where every penny went. That was indeed true. $3.1 billion was the money of tax-paying citizens. And the fate of this money had to be explained transparently. 192 seconds of silence showed that this transparency didn't exist. Don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter to be the first to learn about such critical developments and access detailed analyses. Because every session in Washington, every question, every silence is actually about your rights. And if officials aren't being held accountable, questions need to continue being asked. Every question that Massey, or another congressional member asks, tests the functioning of the system. And Miller's 192 seconds of silence showed that there were serious problems somewhere in the system. Where did the $3.1 billion go? Maybe we'll learn one day. Maybe we won't. But at least, the question was asked. The silence was recorded. And this record will not be forgotten. Don't forget to like our video, subscribe to the channel, and share your valuable comments with us.